Hi, everybody. So, I think we're all familiar with Frankenstein as a cautionary tale warning about the dangers of technology. That's kind of suggested by the subtitle, The Modern Prometheus. Um, Prometheus being uh, the deliverer of godlike knowledge and power to humanity. Um, in a particular fire, the as a symbol of the capacity for transformation, for transfiguration. Um, and Prometheus means like self-consciousness, intentionality, this godlike creative capacity. So it's not unlike Adam and Eve. Um, it's a figure for this transgression, this human transgression, the sense that we know too much for our own good. Um, and so Mary Shelley is retelling that tale. We know we have knowledge we don't deserve. I think that's a real primal kind of guilt or anxiety that our knowledge of the world, I mean, this is a romantic theme that we've been tracking, that our knowledge of the world is unwarranted, unjustified, of a kind of violation, a presumption against nature, the cosmos, against the gods. Um, uh, and and so Prometheus is also tortured in punishment for this transgression, um, uh, in perpetuity, to have his liver eaten out every day by a bird of prey, and then to be restored at night so that he could just suffer again each day anew. So this kind of I mean, it's not unlike the punishment of Eve, at least in the Adam and Eve story. Um, get into this, but the pains of childbirth are a punishment exacted on Eve for her transgression. Um, so this physical, this fate of punishing embodiment, that are the bodily pain, were for our presumption to know, to have godlike knowledge and creative power, were reduced to animal-like suffering. Um, uh, so Mary Shelley is in the modern Prometheus, so she's retelling this tale for modern circumstances, addressing modern technology, and there's some historical relevant historical context about discovery of electricity and experiments on the nervous system, indicating the kind of creative, a lot of what we take for intentional human behavior can be reducible to like electrical reactions. And it's always worth recalling. I mean, the thing about modernity, the idea of the modern, is it's it's not substantially defined, it's formally defined. What is modern is just what is new. So in a way, um, cultures have been thinking about themselves as modern since the Renaissance. It's just this perpetual renewal, um, a sense of breaking from history. Um, And I think and I mean, we're just the same, aren't we? We're so impressed by our technology. We feel so different from the previous generation, but it's uh, it really important to keep in mind every generation feels that way. Every generation feels like it's blazing a new frontier. Um, that's the modern condition. Um, and I think it's so easy to overlook the you know, the modernity of past eras because we're so impressed with our own. There's a kind of myopia. I mean, that's what modernity means in another sense, is a disregard of the past, renewal, renaissance in the moment, in the present. Um, but it's uh, salutary. It's good, j- um, just to gain perspective, to think about the progress of earlier eras. And that's been one of the themes I've tried to emphasize in this course is, you know, the romantics really did blaze the trail for our form of life in a lot of ways. A lot of what we've just passively inherited and take for granted, we don't know any different. They experienced for the first time, you know, um, mass democratic capitalist society, um, as well as these new uh, domains and potentials of science were very novel and humbling in their implications. Um, on the other hand, though, I mean, and but then we should also, you know, think about ourselves in this light as well. Are the technologies that um, you know we really are, you know, I feel like um, did we take for granted now that we've kind of crossed a boundary into this sort of Frankenstein like human engineering? Genetic engineering is uh, um, uh, a, an established practice. Um, Genetic modification, and uh, the you know, in a broader sense, technologies of reproduction, life expectancy, birth control, things we take for granted that have just totally altered um, the reality, what you know, the parameters of a normal human life, um, and just want you to, you know, really think about how that's a Promethean power. We have through our technology really rewritten what it means to be human, and it's, you know, it continues the cosmetic technology. Um, uh, Psychotropic drugs, um, so many ways in which we are engineering ourselves, or products of engineering. Not to mention, you know, the kind of thing that Blake focused on, the uh, corrosive effects of technology, the way in which our forms of social organization engineer bodies, um, like, you know, turn the chimney sweep's hair white. Um, these are physical. Our bodies are products of inadvertent products of technology, victims of technology as much as intentional products. Um, and then there's also, you know, obviously social media, the way we reproduce ourselves through communication, had the way we represent ourselves to each other, and I mean the role of technology in our mutual recognition, how we socialize, how think of the role. We've been living through an era very recently in which video has really transformed our conception of reality. What's the police violence, um, and made us recognize bodies like Black Lives Matter. That's a product of technology. The Me Too movement is a product of technology. The internet. So much of the internet, these communications technology has made us respect and aware of people that weren't recognized before. So these are, in a way, lives that are consequences of technology. They're products of technology, in a certain way. We weren't recognizing until that technology made them visible. Um, so and they're visible in a very specific way in that technology creates. Not to mention this technology, the way I'm being transmitted to you, and the it's just overwhelming. The potential transformation of culture that implies. I mean, whenever I think of the fact that all over the world nobody's going to concerts anymore, nobody's going to, or these kinds of social congregation and interaction that I think is integral to our species. We're such a social species. That's been so drastically limited, and if not eliminated, and replaced, with this technology. It's frightening in its implications. So this cautionary tale of technology is more palpable. The warning is more palpable than ever, and we're do well to heed it. But I also want to point out how I think there's an ironic dimension to the subtitle, The Modern Prometheus. I think, in a way, she's channeling Victor Frankenstein's self-conception. He would be this modern Prometheus. He thinks of himself as a new god. And I think she's mocking him in a way through this the redundancy of the term. Modern Prometheus. I mean, Prometheus was already as modern as can be. The name means a kind of intentionality, as I mentioned. This self creation. So I think that the book is largely about Victor Frankenstein's misguided self-conception, and that highlights, I think, something that's really important in terms of this question of technology, and maybe a reason why I should dial back that alarmist talk that I was just presenting to you about the present, which is that our creature is thoroughly, our species is thoroughly has been thoroughly dependent on technology from the beginning. the the technology of language, a kind of de- prosthetic dependence, a dependence on the prosthetic mediation of ourselves um, to each other through tools, through language. Um, we has always we've always extended beyond ourselves through how we mediate ourselves to each other. Um, Remember Blake's thing: the bird a nest, the spider a web, man friendship. So we um, it is our that idea of a extended phenotype, the bird's nest or the spider's web, the way in which a creature inhabits and organizes its environment is effectively an extension of its body. Our It's kind of a literalist, objective, reductive perspective to say who I am is just my body. It, I mean, who I am, what is my body, but the way in which my body acts in the world. My body isn't, again, just an inert object. It's a tool for activity in the world. So what I am is a way of acting on and interacting with my environment, um, and that's always been the case. And language is I can't help quoting Coleridge here. Um, and that from Kubla Khan, which remember Coleridge called in his preface to that poem a psychological experiment. So that idea of the poem as a kind of uh, product of technology, drugs. Like he did an experiment on himself, and the result was this poem, which is itself a poem about sex and reproduction, sexual passion, and poetic creativity. So very much about the interplay of technology and procreation, just like uh, Frankenstein. Um, and that term miracle device, I think he's talking about a miracle of rare device. Um, his own language. He's talking about the way in which language itself also refers, of course, to sexuality and to music. These are technologies of procreation, of the Promethean fire, um, and that's true. Has always been true of language. That it is literally a miracle device. We transfigure ourselves through language. Um, uh, what how we see one another is mediated by language. We construct ourselves through language. Um, just to mention, um, uh, quickly, I think I've talked before about the idea of the origin of language in music, and the origin of music in as a kind of extended phenotype, a way of inhabiting the environment um, that is highly adaptive because of the way in which how much what bodily expansion it affects, and it's a very rare capacity. Birds have it, whales have it, but the other, our closest primate relatives don't have the capacity for music. Um, but it's extremely powerful to represent, to communicate oneself in music. Think of these teeny little songbirds, the way they fill up their environment. Um, the human capacity to fill up the environment with music is a huge adaptive advantage that I think that early humanoids that had developed that capacity had arguably, huge adaptive advantage, and a tribe that was able to create music, to coordinate and create this like wall of sound. Um, that's incredibly intimidating, and to those that could not do that, it's such an image of social coordination. Um, and what I really want to emphasize about that example, or hypothesis, is what's undoubtedly true, what it demonstrates, and what's undoubtedly true about language, is that it's a medium of social recognition. So to for a tribe to create music, and for that music to be heard, or to rhythmically coordinate, and for that sound to be heard by others, is for you to be recognized as that sound. That sound mediates a social identity. That's the way it is with language. We think of ourselves as isolated identities that express ourselves variously, but really it's the other way around. We find ourselves in our in how we express ourselves. So in a way, our expressions of ourselves give us our identity. Um, I was talking earlier about how social justice movements like Black Lives Matter and Me Too, how pivotally technology, the pivotal role that technology has played in these movements, allowing us to recognize and communicate about people and suffering that formerly had gone unrecognized. But there's also this dimension in which this aspect, that this personhood is itself a product of the technology, insofar as it's this technology that it's allowing us to recognize it. This personhood that's getting recognized is inseparable from the technology that mediates it, that communicates it. But what I want to suggest is that that's always been the case. We learn language, late. We exist in the world long before we learn to communicate about it. And long before we learn to communicate ourselves. We learn language, we learn the capacity to express ourselves, but that's actually something that language, it's a creation. The self that we express is a consequence of language, that it's given to us as much as we assert ourselves and express ourselves. The form of that expression is something that we inherit and receive. Again, I'm just trying to emphasize how much we have always been creatures defined by and reliant upon these kind of prosthetic technological extensions of ourselves. So here's a little example, I think, from the Bourne Identity, the movie starring Matt Damon, where he plays a spy with amnesia. He wakes up and he surprises himself by who he is. He's surprised by who he is. He can speak German and fight and stuff that in ways that he is surprised to be able to do. But what I think's interesting is that's the way it is for us, all of us. We inherit the defining capabilities of personhood. We think it's us, but so much of it is actually inherited, and we exercise it in 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 spite of ourselves. So much of what we think of as self-active self-expression is actually passive uh, repetition, perpetuation of what we've inherited.
Können Sie die Schilder nicht lesen?
So, aufstehen. Los, auf jetzt.
Der Park ist geschlossen. Sie können hier nicht schlafen.
All right.
Zeigen Sie mir Ihren Ausweis.
No, I don't.
Ihre Papiere.
I don't have any papers. I lost meine Papiere. Ich habe sie verloren.
Genug. Stehen Sie jetzt auf.
Ich muss schlafen.
Los, hoch. Hey, aufstehen. Hoch.
So recognizing the sort of creative power, the Promethean power of what we couldn't take more for granted. Language, what seemed is nothing is more ingrained in our sense of normalcy than language. That Promethean, that godlike Promethean power, is implicit in just our normal experience of reality. That's already a technology of world creation. So I think that's really important to bear in mind. And indeed, Mary Shelley emphasizes it in the preface. Her use of fantasy, the fantastical premise of this book, creating, engineering a person. She likens that to fantasy elements of canonical literature, like in classical epic, Homer, Shakespeare, Milton. We read this and we think, oh, it's a book about technology. But I think what she's saying here is, no, this is a book of fantasy in the tradition of this canonical tradition of literature based on incorporating supernatural elements. So she's making us think about sort of the technology of imagination and fantasy and language, storytelling, epic poetry, and so on. The role that's played in culture since time immemorial. So again, it's easy to get misled by the supposed uniqueness of modern technology. She's actually situating this in a long tradition. Okay, so I want to read this passage from the preface and point out some other aspects of it that I think bear noticing, that I've highlighted here in bold. Okay, so she starts talking about this premise of technological construction of a person. The event on which the interest of the story depends is exempt from the disadvantages of mere tale of specters or enchantment, Gothic, horror novels. However impossible as a physical fact, it affords a point of view to the imagination for the delineating of human passions more comprehensive and commanding than any which the ordinary relations of existing events can yield. The Iliad, tragic poetry of Greece, Shakespeare and The Tempest and Midsummer Night's Dream, and most especially Milton in Paradise Lost, conform to this rule. And the most humblest novelist who seeks to confer or receive amusement from his labors may, without presumption, apply to prose fiction a license, or rather a rule, from the adoption of which so many exquisite combinations of human feeling have resulted in the highest specimens of poetry. I think that's an interesting formulation, a license, or rather a rule. Because license and rule are kind of contradictory terms, aren't they? But I think that sort of illuminates what she's saying here about how fantasy, incorporating supernatural elements, so taking license from reality, freedom from the constraints of the ordinary relations of existing events, it allows us to explore a more commanding, more comprehensive and commanding delineation of human passion. So I think that she's acknowledging, I think, kind of that Promethean license of self-creation. We can tinker with the parameters, the real parameters of human passion. Create new rules, and that afford a more comprehensive and commanding delineation. I think all these terms are very suggestive of a kind of construction of human passion. So much like, the sculptor in Ozymandias molding human passion, constructing. Just going forward in the preface, the circumstance on which my story rests was suggested in casual conversation. It was commenced partly as a source of amusement and partly as an expedient for exercising any untried resources of mind. My chief concern in this respect has been limited to avoiding the enervating effects of the novels of the present day. So, like Wordsworth in the preface to Lyrical Ballad, she's making it clear her contempt for sensational Gothic novels like The Mysteries of Udolpho, Anne Radcliffe. She wants to distinguish herself from the kind of sensationalistic fantasy, just kind of graphic horror. I mean, isn't that what you always hear today? Like, I mean, that it's always the same thing in modern culture. This, again, the repetitiveness of modernity. This question of, is culture just sensational? Is culture just noise? Is it too graphic? Or is there some deeper reflection or delineation, exploration of human passion going on? And the other ambitions she has for the book: the exhibition of the amiableness of domestic affection, excellence of universal virtue. So I just want to point out the different elements that she's naming here: play, enjoyment, pleasure. Again, something that Wordsworth emphasizes is, you know, an element of the precondition of poetry. Expedient for exercising untried resources of mind, experiment, imagination. And I mean, and that's it remains that, right? She's testing our imagination as we today as we read it. And I think this is also very pregnant and suggestive. Domestic affection. That's what the creature in the novel is looking for. That's what all the characters are looking for. Frankenstein, Walton, they want family. They want friendship, amiableness. That's what they're looking for. And so that's very suggestive. Mary Shelley's saying that's what this book offers you. So that overlap again, the book is constructing human passion. It's offering human friendship and domesticity, family, something like a home.